In this lesson, we'll generate a mesh for simulation. After completing this lesson, you'll be able to generate a mesh and use press pull. Carry on with the file from our previous example. The next step is going to be to generate our mesh. Now, if you use the solve option, by default, it'll automatically go through and generate a mesh based on the default settings. And that's okay, but in this case, I want to generate the mesh and make sure that it's fine enough in the areas that we want to focus on. This will also help present any problems that may arise. So from our browser, under Mesh, we're going to right-click and select Generate Mesh. Notice that we get an error, and this does happen from time to time, and in this case it says, Meshing error, phase solid meshing, description, no further information. It doesn't really help us out, unfortunately, but luckily I know where the problem lies. Anytime you create geometry, you want to make sure that it perfectly aligns with the surrounding solid bodies, or ideally has a slight bit of overlap. That way you know that there's no small gaps in between edges or faces. Now in our case, I know that the issue lies when we added these small segments in here that were adding additional structure. Now if you remember, we created one using the exact inside profile of this opening. We extruded it up, we patterned it, and then we combine all four of them. Now there are certain areas where it perfectly aligns, but I'm going to guess that in these corners, these filleted corners, that we're likely going to have an issue. And sometimes you can find this by hovering over these edges, and you'll notice how this arc on top is one single edge, but on the bottom we actually have four smaller segments. Now this doesn't instantly dictate that we have a problem here, and there are other ways that we can go about finding it. For instance, going into the Simplify workspace and starting to delete some entities. But you'll notice again that hovering over this shows me that I have three edges here, where this upper edge has four. And if you look in these smaller recesses where we did our extrude cut, the arc on the top and the bottom match in terms of the number of entities that make up that. And that's true for any of these edges that you go around to. And there are some cases like this where we have a sharp corner that we could come back and we can address that. But again, the bottom and the top have the same number. So in order to fix this, I'm going to go back to the model workspace. It's something that we could adjust inside of the Simplify workspace in simulation, but we want to make sure that it applies to the model itself. We're going to select X star. We're going to expand it. And I'm going to come in and I want to click on this face and I want to take a look in the timeline to figure out where that feature is. So we have the combine, and we have the mirror, and we have this first mirror, and then we have this extrude. So I'm going to right click and I want to roll the history marker here. So when we're at this extrude, rather than going back and adjusting the original sketch or making any changes to that, what I'm actually going to do is come into the bodies folder. I'm going to hide my body bottom surface as well as the X star body, and I'm simply going to use the modify press pull command. This is going to allow me to grab all of these external faces, and we're going to use this selection and we're going to extend them out a small amount. Now the rib that they intersect with is 2 millimeters thick, but I'm only going to add 0.5 millimeters. It's going to extend that out. If I drag the marker just past it, it'll still mirror this because it's the same body. It'll mirror those across. If I show the X star body, we'll allow those to combine. And again, once they're combined, they take on the nylon 6 material and appearance. So now I'm going to take the history marker, and I'm going to drag it down the timeline and go all the way to the end. Because our timeline extends past this end, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I scroll as far as I can go, and I'm going to take the history marker and drag it pretty far down the line. Now in some cases you might be able to just go ahead and drag that marker all the way to the end. In some cases you might want to step forward a couple features at a time. It really depends on the geometry that you're editing and whether or not other things are going to rely on that. Now in our case we can drag it all the way to the end, we can update all the graphics, and in this case I want to actually go ahead and save the file after these changes before I go back in and make changes to our simulation. So let's save the file and then navigate back to our simulation workspace. So again, we still have the warning on the mesh. We're going to right click on mesh and we're going to regenerate it. Once the mesh generation is complete, you can view it on the screen on your model. If it doesn't instantly show, you can turn on the light bulb icon or right-click and toggle mesh visibility. You see that we have mesh on the component tray as well as a mesh on the airframe itself. And if we zoom in, you can see that the mesh element sizes are reduced in this area so we can analyze the small generative mesh shape that we created. Everything looks pretty good here. We might want to come back and make some refinements later, but for right now, I want to go ahead and save my file so we can move on to our next step.